I've just finished writing this book, Your Boat in the Sun, and it's been a bit of a labour of love, as not having sailed in UK waters for over 30 years, I've just completed 2 summer seasons in conditions that I'd forgotten about. I found myself somewhat surprised to be reminded how challenging spring and summer sailing conditions can be like in the English Channel. Decades ago I started sailing cruising boats out of the Hamble River, where I used to have trot moorings, and I'd totally forgotten just how short and mainly cold the sailing season is this far north compared to other parts of the world. Mind you, a few trips down the canals of France to the Med back in those days, as well as visits to Gibraltar and the Costa del Sol directly across from Biscay, did make me wonder, even in those days, if I was really getting the best use out of my boat. But that was before the advent of low-cost airfares, so the practicalities of keeping a boat and visiting it by plane or possibly car for pretty small bucks were not very good. Things have changed. Inexpensive and fast travel to distant places has really changed the opportunities for finding a place to keep your boat in the sun. About 3 years ago, I moved my home from the Mediterranean to northern France, and I purchased a boat, Golden Haze, in Lymington for channel sailing, just as the COVID outbreak started, and I sailed her back immediately in March to Boulogne-sur-Mer. I managed over the following 2 years to sail most of the channel again, making videos mainly about French Channel ports and some of the South Coast UK ones as well, which are all on this YouTube channel at Sailing Gently. Despite the COVID restrictions, I was able to sail extensively in the English Channel, but I encountered some dodgy weather, and occasionally, even in summer months, I froze my nuts off. Okay, it's a blustery day, it's blowing 25 to 30 knots. I'm just about to start the engine and take in what remains of the jib, under which I've been running at 6 to 7 knots all the way up from Yarmouth. I'm happy to say the engine actually started, which is good news. I seem to have going to pull in the jib now. I seem to have what is technically known as a cup here. 30 knots of wind. Although there were some lovely days hanging off a buoy in Alderney Bray Harbour, having a glass of wine, and then going back to Cherbourg Marina to get things fixed. After 2 seasons in the English Channel, I'd had enough, and I put Golden Haze, which is a Beneteau 323, on a ship, and I moved it to the Caribbean, and a berth in the biggest, most modern, comfortable and sophisticated and incredibly inexpensive marina I could find. For some 10 years I'd kept Porpoise, which was my Westerly Ocean 43, in Gibraltar, and each summer Louise and I would sail east and south down to Sicily, Malta, Tunisia via the Balearics. Prior to that I had Porpoise in La Rochelle, France, and from there I used to cruise Brittany and the Rios of northern Spain, then down to Lisbon and the Algarve. Before my circumnavigation, I cruised between directing jobs, almost all of the Mediterranean, and I spent several years in the Greek islands and Turkey as a sort of occasional liveaboard. After some 5 or 6 years of this, I got bored and I headed out to the Caribbean. Sitting here in Rodney Bay Lagoon, St. Lucia, it's very hard for me to remember when I was back in UK waters what I thought blue water cruising was going to be like. What sort of boat did I need? What sort of equipment did I need? Was I a good enough sailor to be able to do it? In fact, I think anyone with a little bit of experience and a good heavy boat, a well-constructed solid boat, can do this easily. It's not a problem.
My 1979 Moody 36 Bambola Cat.
And I spent 5 or 6 years cruising the area, including Venezuela up to Puerto Rico, through the islands to Cuba, great time in Cuba, and then on to Key West, from where I sailed up the east coast to the Chesapeake, using mainly the ICW. So having spent a year in the wonderful cruising grounds of the USA East Coast, I headed south and west to Panama through the canals with their giant locks, and out of the Panama Canal system into the vast Pacific Ocean. I crossed the equator for the first time on my way to the Galapagos Islands, where I viewed giant tortoises, small finches, and big sea iguana. And then I sailed west to the magic Marquesa Islands, which were probably the high point of my circumnavigation. Although the day spent in the isolated Cook Island of Suvorov, looking for pirate treasure and dining on the beach with a couple of other sailing boat crews that were anchored in the lagoon, followed by glorious evenings at anchor with my own crew, was a pretty unforgettable experience. After Tahiti, Bora Bora, Tonga, Fiji, I ended up in New Zealand, and I left the boat there to fly home because I was moving house to La Rochelle. Mission accomplished, I returned to Bambola, which was an Angus Primrose Moody 36, and I sailed her across the very rough Tasman Sea into Sydney Harbour, Port Jackson. Leaving there, because it did rain a bit, I got stormbound in Lady Musgrave's Island near Brisbane, and I helped the rescue of some boat crews with the aid of a helicopter in a gale in that lagoon. Well, 60 knots of wind is a fair amount of wind. And then I headed onwards up to Darwin. The magic of Indonesia, and particularly the Komodo Island visit, to meet up with these extraordinary and somewhat dangerous giant lizards, or perhaps they're rightly called dragons, was pretty special. From there I sailed the island chain to Phuket in Thailand, which was a wonderful experience, before heading out to Sri Lanka and up to the Gulf of Aden, being attacked by pirates and robbed on my way to Djibouti. Up the Red Sea, stopping for a while in Sudan and Egypt, before popping out of the Suez Canal back into the Mediterranean and across that sea via Gibraltar up to my new home in La Rochelle in France. So, your boat in the sun, in a place where you can sail for at least 8 or 9 months of the year, and perhaps even be on board sunbathing on Christmas Day, is something I think I can claim to have some experience of. So that is what this book I've just published is all about, and it's available now from my website, gentlesailing.com. I've even looked at just keeping your boat in northern France, where the weather systems are continental, warmer, and infinitely cheaper than the UK. I have, of course, covered the Atlantic coasts of France, Spain, Portugal, and of course the Algarve. And I've listed all the marinas and their prices and the local airports that I think are viable. The emphasis is on being able to visit the boat during the winter as well as the summer, with the expectation of having reasonable weather and being able to perhaps sunbathe on Christmas Day. So I've split the Mediterranean in two, with a line of latitude that runs from Gibraltar to Turkey and Cyprus. North of this line, I've included places where the winter weather is good, and I've gone as far as the Balearic Islands. South of the line, where the average temperatures all year round are mainly very comfortable, I've looked at North African countries that are not in the EU and which are very welcoming to folks with boats, and some are charging as little as £1,200 a year for a modern secure berth in a marina. The same applies to the rest of the southern Mediterranean, including Sicily, Malta, Corfu, the rest of the Greek islands, and of course the wonderful magic cruising ground of Turkey with its superb marinas and very low prices. What I've tried to do is to include places that are accessible and close to airports, with reasonably priced charter flights, and marinas who will look after the boat properly when you're back in the UK. Because getting your boat to these places can be challenging, there are details of the routes, using the French Canals to the south of France, or cruising gently down the Atlantic coasts of France, Spain and Portugal, or having your boat put on a lorry, or using one of the several shipping companies that will pick up your boat in the UK and deliver it to the Balearics, or Gibraltar, Italy or Turkey, and at really quite reasonable prices. And looking at sensible routing to sail your boat yourself from Gibraltar to Malta, the Greek islands, Tunisia, Turkey and Cyprus, and even on to Egypt in the Red Sea. There is of course an entire chapter about the Caribbean and sailing her there yourself via the Canaries and Cape Verdes, details of the timing, routes and the equipment you're going to need, as well as the alternative of putting her on a ship from the UK or the Mediterranean, which is what I did at the end of last year with my Beneteau 323 Golden Haze. There are lists of the shipping companies and their sailing schedules and what's involved in this process of moving your boat. There's everything you'll need to know about the islands and the marina options and where your boat's going to be well looked after and kept safe from hurricanes. Sections on finding affordable Caribbean insurance, as well as the costs of keeping your boat in this glorious cruising ground, and all the economics of flights out there from the UK. If you're tired of sailing in cold, wet, windy weather and you want a much longer sailing season for the very big investment that is your boat, then this book, which looks at the serious issues of a place in the sun for your boat, is what you need. The book has over 45,000 words, so it's not short. Dozens of chartlets, photographs and illustrations. Your Boat in the Sun is available from gentlesailing.com as an instant digital download with a link to a site that will convert it to hard copy if that's what you prefer. So, I hope you're going to find this book informative, entertaining and a jolly good read. I think what I'm saying is I really hope you enjoy it. At my website, gentlesailing.com, you can find my books about sailing and boats. French Canal routes to the Mediterranean has sold over 3,000 copies, and the Gentle Sailing route to the Med, down the Atlantic coast without having to spend a night at sea, has sold over 2,700 copies. The Atlantic Crossing Guide, which I published last year, is being downloaded in amazing numbers, I'm really pleased to say. They're all instant PDF downloads, and there's a link to a UK website that can turn them into printed books for around £5 if that's what you prefer. gentlesailing.com. About a dozen books there, including guides to the Caribbean and crossing the Pacific. Fair winds.